A journey of kindness and respect. The busy terminal at Atlanta International Airport buzzed with activity as travelers shuffled between gates, tugging suitcases and clutching tickets. Among them was a striking duo, a tall black man in a tailored navy blue suit and his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, whose colorful backpack swung with her every step. Her wide smile lit up the space around her as she pointed toward the expansive window overlooking the tarmac. "Daddy, is that our plane?" she asked, her voice brimming with excitement as she spotted a sleek, white aircraft trimmed in gold accents. "Yes, sweet pea, that's ours," her father, Mr. Langston Reed, replied with a warm smile, gently squeezing her hand. He was the founder and CEO of Horizon Air, an airline known for its commitment to excellent service. Today's flight was different for him. He wasn't traveling on business or in an official capacity. This was a rare opportunity to spend time with his daughter during her spring break. Maya's eyes sparkled. "I've never flown in first class before. Is it true they give you warm towels and fancy drinks?" Langston chuckled, adjusting her braids gently. "You'll see for yourself. But remember, first class or not, it's important to treat everyone with respect." "Deal." "Deal." Maya beamed, giving her father a quick hug. Langston couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as he recalled the email that had interrupted their trip plans. A last-minute virtual meeting with investors had forced him to juggle priorities. He had assured Maya that they'd still have a great time, starting with this flight. As they approached the priority boarding lane, travelers around them did a double take, recognizing Langston. Known for his down-to-earth demeanor despite his high-profile status, Langston greeted everyone with a polite nod, but his focus remained on Maya. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." The flight attendant greeted him at the aircraft door. Her polished smile radiated professionalism. "It's a pleasure to have you on board." "Thank you," Langston said, shaking her hand. "And this is my daughter, Maya. It's her first time flying first class." "Welcome aboard, Maya," the attendant said, her smile softening. "You're going to love it." As Langston settled Maya into her window seat, he crouched down to her eye level. "Sweet pea, I'll have to step away for a while to take care of some work. But if you need anything at all, just press this button, and the flight attendants will help you, okay?" "Okay, Daddy," Maya said, hugging her stuffed giraffe tightly. Langston stood, signaling another flight attendant, Miss Kelly, who had an air of practiced calm about her. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly beneath her cap. "Miss Kelly, could you keep an eye on Maya while I'm away? She's very independent, but I'd appreciate your support." "Of course, Mr. Reed," Kelly said, her smile polite but thin. Satisfied, Langston gave Maya a reassuring nod before heading toward the economy section, where his meeting would take place. As the flight took off, Maya was captivated by the sights outside her window. The clouds seemed close enough to touch, and the bustling airport below shrank into a tiny maze. For a while, she entertained herself with crayons and a coloring book. But as time passed, she grew thirsty. Maya hesitated before pressing the call button. Moments later, Miss Kelly appeared, her demeanor noticeably colder than before. "Yes," Kelly said, her tone sharp. May I have some apple juice, please?" Maya asked softly, clutching her giraffe for comfort. Kelly sighed audibly. "We're not serving drinks yet. You'll have to wait." Maya nodded, sinking into her seat as Kelly walked away without another word. Other passengers received their beverages and warm towels, while Kelly ignored Maya's row entirely. Maya watched, confused and disheartened. Later, as the plane encountered turbulence, Maya's ears began to hurt. She remembered her father's advice about drinking water to help, but when she pressed the call button again, Kelly's curt response made her retreat further into silence. The businessman across the aisle noticed Maya's discomfort. "Miss, could you get her something to drink?" he asked. Kelly's professional smile returned briefly. "I'll see to it," she replied, but she walked away without fulfilling the request. Maya's discomfort grew. She was cold and hungry, and her once bright excitement for the flight dimmed. The elderly woman behind her offered to share her meal, but Kelly dismissed the gesture with a manufactured excuse about company policy. As Maya sat in her seat, clutching her stuffed giraffe tightly, she whispered to herself, "I wish Daddy would come back soon." Meanwhile, Langston's meeting in the economy section was running long. He glanced at his watch, feeling the pang of a father's intuition that something was amiss. Excusing himself, he walked back toward first class, his thoughts occupied by Maya's excited face when they had boarded. As he approached her row, he noticed her slouched posture and the way she clung to her giraffe as though it were her only source of comfort. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Langston quickened his pace, ready to unravel the truth of what had transpired during his absence. A father's intuition. Langston Reed approached the first-class cabin with purpose, his polished dress shoes making muted sounds on the plush carpet. Something wasn't sitting right in his gut, and the moment he saw Maya hunched in her seat, his suspicion turned into a quiet storm of concern. Maya's usual brightness was dimmed. She sat curled into herself, her stuffed giraffe clutched tightly in her small hands. Her once vibrant yellow sweater bore faint marks, and her eyes were rimmed with unshed tears. It was as though she was willing herself to disappear. Langston crouched beside her seat, his voice soft but steady. "Sweet pea, what's wrong?" Maya's head snapped up, startled by his sudden presence. Her lips trembled as she looked at her father, her small voice barely audible. "Hi, Daddy. I'm fine." Langston's sharp eyes scanned her face and noticed the faint redness around her wrist. His brows furrowed as he gently took her hand. "Maya, where did this come from?" Maya glanced at her wrist and quickly pulled her sleeve down to cover the marks. "I had just bumped it," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Langston's eyes narrowed. Maya wasn't the type to cover up a simple bump. He looked around and saw the flight attendant he had entrusted with his daughter standing near the galley. Kelly's back was to them, but her stiff posture and rigid movements spoke volumes. "Maya," Langston said, his voice low and calm, "I need you to tell me if something happened. Did someone hurt you?" Maya hesitated, biting her lip. She wanted to tell him everything, but Kelly's earlier threat echoed in her mind. "If you say a word to your daddy, you'll regret it." Maya's eyes darted to Kelly, then back to her father. Langston caught the glance, his protective instincts roaring to life. He placed his hand over hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell me anything. No one will hurt you again, I promise." Tears filled Maya's eyes, and she opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Kelly turned around and spotted Langston. Her face transformed into a polished mask of professionalism, and she approached them with what Langston immediately recognized as forced cheerfulness. "Mr. Reed," Kelly said, her tone overly bright, "I was just about to bring Maya some snacks. She's been such a well-behaved passenger." Langston stood slowly, his towering frame seeming even more imposing as he faced her. His tone was polite but cold. "That won't be necessary. Maya, have you had anything to eat or drink since I left?" Maya hesitated again, glancing at Kelly, who subtly shook her head, her sharp gaze sending a silent warning. Langston caught the exchange, his jaw tightening. "I ask you a question, sweetheart," Langston said, his voice firm but gentle. Maya's shoulders slumped, and she shook her head. "No, Daddy." Langston's stomach churned. "And why not? I specifically asked for her to be taken care of." Kelly's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, I must have misunderstood your instructions. I thought you didn't want her to have anything before the service began. But don't worry, I'll fix it right away." Langston's eyes bored into her, his calm exterior masking the storm brewing within. "You misunderstood that I wanted my child to have water and a meal during a 4-hour flight." Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but Langston held up a hand to stop her. "Enough. Maya, come with me." He gently took his daughter's hand and led her toward the galley. where another flight attendant was preparing refreshments. Kelly trailed behind them, her polished facade beginning to crack. "Excuse me," Langston addressed the other attendant, a younger woman with a warm demeanor. "What's your name?" "Olivia, sir," she replied, looking at him with slight nervousness. "Olivia, has my daughter received any water or food during this flight?" Langston's tone was calm but carried an undeniable authority. Olivia hesitated, glancing at Kelly, who was glaring at her. I don't think so, sir. I wasn't assigned to first class for this flight." Langston nodded, his suspicions confirmed. "Can you please prepare a meal and a drink for her? And bring me a fresh blanket for her as well." "Yes, sir." "Right away," Olivia said, hurrying to comply. Langston turned to Kelly, his expression unreadable. "We're going to have a conversation, but first, I'm going to make sure my daughter is comfortable." Kelly opened her mouth, but Langston's piercing gaze stopped her. She stepped back, her carefully constructed composure unraveling. Returning to Maya's seat, Langston sat beside her and draped the blanket Olivia brought over her shoulders. He handed her a cup of juice and a small plate of food, his voice softening. "Eat, sweetheart. You must be starving." Maya hesitated, glancing at Kelly, who stood a few rows away. Langston noticed and gave her a reassuring smile. "It's okay. She's not going to bother you anymore." As Maya sipped her juice, Langston's mind raced. He knew something was deeply wrong, and he was determined to uncover the full extent of it. While Maya ate, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to his legal team, instructing them to prepare for a potential investigation. Once Maya finished eating, Langston kissed her forehead. "I'll be right back, sweet pea. Stay here." Langston walked back to the galley, where Kelly was lingering. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Miss Kelly," he began, his voice low and controlled, "we need to talk." Kelly attempted a smile, but it wavered under his intense gaze. "Of course, Mr. Reed. How can I help you?" Langston stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've mistreated my daughter, ignored her basic needs, and left her feeling unsafe on a flight that I own. I don't need to tell you how unacceptable this is." Kelly's face paled. "Mr. Reed, I didn't." "You didn't what?" Langston interrupted, his tone icy. "Think I'd find out? Think I wouldn't notice my daughter's fear and discomfort? Let me be clear. You're done here. I'll ensure you're held accountable for every action you've taken today." Kelly's composure shattered. "Please, Mr. Reed. I didn't mean." "Save it," Langston said, his voice cutting through her excuses. "I'll deal with you once we land. For now, stay away from my daughter." Langston turned on his heel and walked back to Maya, his resolve solidified. The calm facade he had maintained so far was cracking, and his protective instincts demanded justice for his little girl. What Kelly didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Langston Reed wasn't just a father. He was a man with influence, and he intended to use every ounce of it to ensure no child ever endured what Maya had today. The breaking point. Langston Reed sat beside Maya as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, his mind churning with plans and decisions. He had dealt with many crises in his life as a CEO, but this one was personal. Maya, his vibrant, fearless daughter, had been subjected to humiliation and neglect on a flight he owned. The thought made his blood simmer. Maya sat quietly, her small hands clutching her stuffed giraffe. "Mr. Jumbles." Langston noticed the way she glanced nervously toward the galley, where Kelly lingered, her polished smile now replaced by a look of uneasy dread. Langston leaned closer to Maya. "Sweetheart, I need you to tell me everything that happened. I promise you, nothing bad will happen to you. Daddy's here." Maya hesitated, then whispered, "She said I was spoiled. She said I didn't belong here." Langston's heart clenched. "Did she hurt you, Maya? Did she put her hands on you?" Maya nodded, pulling up her sleeve to reveal faint red marks on her wrist. "She grabbed me here, Daddy, and when I spilled my juice, she told me I was useless and clumsy. Langston's jaw tightened as he took in the marks. A storm of emotions brewed inside him: anger, guilt, and a deep resolve to make this right. He cupped Maya's face gently. "I'm so proud of you for telling me. You didn't do anything wrong, okay?" Maya nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I just wanted to be good, Daddy." Langston kissed her forehead. "You are the best, sweetest girl I know. None of this is your fault." He straightened, his focus sharpening. His daughter deserved justice, and Kelly needed to face consequences, not just for Maya, but to set a precedent that no passenger, especially a child, would ever be treated this way again. Langston stood and made his way to the galley, his every step deliberate and controlled. Kelly was speaking quietly with another flight attendant, Olivia, who looked uncomfortable. When she saw Langston approach, Kelly straightened, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Mr. Reed," Kelly began, her voice trembling slightly. "Is there something else I can do for you?" "Yes," Langston said coldly. "You can explain why you thought it was acceptable to insult, neglect, and physically harm my daughter." Kelly's face drained of color. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to leave an 8-year-old child without food or water for hours. You didn't mean to grab her wrist so hard it left marks. Or perhaps you didn't mean to call her spoiled and tell her she didn't belong in first class. Langston's voice was calm, but the weight of his words made Kelly shrink back. "Mr. Reed, I can explain." "No," Langston cut her off. "You've had plenty of chances to explain. Now, you'll explain to my legal team and the authorities." Kelly's professional demeanor cracked completely. "Please, Mr. Reed, I didn't mean to hurt her. I was just stressed. It's been a long flight, and she was demanding." Langston's eyes burned with fury. "Demanding? My daughter politely asked for water and a meal, both of which I specifically requested you provide. What's demanding about that?" Kelly stammered, her excuses faltering. Langston didn't let her finish. "You've shown nothing but cruelty and prejudice, and you've abused your position of authority to demean and harm a child. You're unfit to serve in any capacity that requires decency or professionalism." The younger flight attendant, Olivia, hesitated before stepping forward. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I saw some of what happened. Maya was nothing but polite. She didn't deserve any of this." Langston nodded at Olivia. "Thank you for your honesty. I'll need you to provide a full statement once we land." Olivia's gaze shifted to Kelly, who glared daggers at her, but Olivia stood firm. "Of course, sir." Langston turned back to Kelly. "Stay in the galley for the remainder of the flight. Don't approach my daughter, or me, again." Kelly opened her mouth to argue, but the steely finality in Langston's voice silenced her. She stepped back, her face pale and her hands trembling. Langston returned to his seat, where Maya sat, her head leaning against the window. He crouched beside her and smiled softly. "It's all taken care of, sweet pea. You're safe now." Maya looked at him, her eyes still wary. "Is she going to get in trouble?" Langston nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. What she did was very wrong, and people who do wrong need to face consequences. But more importantly, I'm going to make sure no one else ever treats you, or anyone else, like that again." Maya nodded slowly, her grip on Mr. Jumbles loosening slightly. "Okay, Daddy." Langston sat beside her, pulling out his tablet. He typed out a detailed email to his legal team, outlining the incident and instructing them to begin gathering evidence. He also contacted his airline's HR department, requesting Kelly's employee file and disciplinary history. He knew this wasn't her first offense. Behavior like this rarely happened in isolation. As the plane began its descent, Langston felt a sense of grim determination. By the time they landed, Kelly's career would be over, and Maya's ordeal would spark a change in how his airline, and the entire industry, handled incidents like this. When the plane touched down, Langston stood and helped Maya with her seatbelt. "We're almost done, sweetheart. Just stay close to me, okay?" Maya nodded, holding his hand tightly as they exited the plane. A team of airport security officers and airline executives was waiting at the gate. Langston's expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp as he greeted them. "This is Maya, my daughter," Langston said, his voice steady. "She was mistreated by a flight attendant, and I expect a thorough investigation." One of the security officers nodded. "We've been briefed, Mr. Reed. We'll take your statements and begin our inquiry immediately." Langston crouched to Maya's level. "Sweetheart, these people are going to ask you some questions. Just tell them the truth, okay? Daddy will be right here." Maya nodded, her small voice steady. "Okay, Daddy." As the security team led Maya to a private room, Langston turned to the airline executives. "I want a full report on this incident, including passenger testimonies and any prior complaints against Kelly. This isn't just about Maya. It's about the values this airline represents." "Understood." The executives nodded, their faces pale. "Understood, Mr. Reed." Langston watched as Maya disappeared into the interview room, his heart heavy but resolute. His daughter's strength inspired him, and he was determined to ensure her bravery was honored. What had started as a simple flight had become a turning point, not just for Langston and Maya, but for the future of Horizon Air. Confrontation at 35,000 feet. The private lounge in the airport bustled with activity as passengers exited the aircraft. Langston Reed had arranged for Maya to be escorted to a quiet, secure area where she could recover in peace while the investigation continued. Meanwhile, Langston prepared himself for what was to come, confronting the consequences of Kelly's behavior and setting an example for his airline and the entire industry. The scene on the plane just moments before landing had been tense. As Langston approached the galley for a final word with Kelly, the air marshal, alerted by the captain about the incident, stood nearby, his presence a silent reminder that Langston's concerns were being taken seriously. Kelly's posture was rigid, her professional mask barely holding. Her polished blonde hair, once pristine, now hung slightly limp, as if the weight of her actions was starting to show. "Miss Kelly," Langston said, his voice calm but steely, "this is your last opportunity to explain yourself. I need to know why you thought it was acceptable to treat any passenger, let alone an 8-year-old girl, the way you did." Kelly opened her mouth, but her voice faltered. "Mr. Reed, I never intended to harm your daughter. It's been a stressful day, and maybe I wasn't at my best." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Not at your best. Let me clarify. You denied a child basic necessities like food and water. You physically grabbed her, leaving marks. You insulted her repeatedly. Tell me, Miss Kelly, how exactly does stress justify any of that?" Kelly's cheeks flushed, and her gaze darted around the cabin as though searching for an escape. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," she was demanding. "I thought I was teaching her a lesson." Langston's voice grew colder, his words like a sharp blade. "Teaching her a lesson. Maya is a child, not a student in your personal classroom. And if this was your way of teaching, then you've chosen the wrong profession. Your job is to provide care and service, not to belittle and harm." The air marshal shifted slightly, his authoritative presence adding weight to Langston's words. Kelly's demeanor changed abruptly, her defenses rising. "I've worked here for years, Mr. Reed, and I've never had a complaint like this before. Maybe you're blowing this out of proportion because she's your daughter." Langston's eyes narrowed, his calm unraveling just slightly. "You think I'm exaggerating. I've interviewed passengers who witnessed your behavior. I've seen the bruises on Maya's wrist and the fear in her eyes. Trust me, Miss Kelly, this is not a matter of personal bias. This is about your complete failure to perform your duties with basic decency." Kelly's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She seemed to realize there was no escape. Langston continued, his voice steady but firm. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty. You will remain on board until security escorts you off the plane. Further actions will depend on the results of the investigation, but I can assure you, your career with Horizon Air is over." Kelly stumbled backward slightly, her face pale. "Mr. Reed, please, I didn't mean." Langston held up a hand. "Enough. Your actions today have consequences, and as the CEO of this airline, it is my responsibility to ensure they are enforced." The air marshal stepped forward, positioning himself between Langston and Kelly. "Miss Kelly, you're to remain seated in the galley until we land. Do not interact with any passengers or staff." Kelly sank into a jump seat, her hands trembling as she realized the gravity of her situation. The polished veneer she had maintained for years was now a shattered facade, and there was no salvaging it. As the plane taxied to the gate, Langston returned to Maya's seat. She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, her hand clutching Mr. Jumble's. "Is she gone, Daddy?" Maya asked softly. Langston knelt beside her, his large hand resting gently on hers. "Not yet, sweet pea, but she won't bother you again. I promise." Maya nodded, her small face still carrying traces of worry. Langston stroked her hair gently. "You've been so brave today, Maya. I'm so proud of you." The plane came to a stop, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we have some additional procedures to complete before deplaning." Langston stood, holding Maya's hand as a team of airport security officers and the airline's head of operations boarded the plane. Passengers watched in stunned silence as Kelly was escorted off the aircraft, her once confident stride now a defeated shuffle. In the terminal, Langston led Maya toward a private lounge where a team of security officers, HR representatives, and legal advisors awaited. A warm blanket and a glass of juice had already been prepared for Maya, who clung tightly to her father's hand. As she settled into a chair, Langston crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to some people about what happened, but I'll be right here, okay?" Maya nodded, her trust in her father unwavering. Langston kissed her forehead and stood, facing the assembled group with the same commanding presence he used in boardrooms. "I want this incident investigated thoroughly," Langston said, his voice calm but firm. "Start by interviewing passengers and crew. Review security footage, if available. And I want Miss Kelly's entire employment history on my desk by morning." The airline's head of operations nodded. "Understood, Mr. Reed. We'll also review training protocols and address any gaps in our service standards." Langston crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "This isn't just about Maya. This is about setting a precedent. No passenger, regardless of age or status, should ever experience what my daughter went through today." The group dispersed to begin their work, leaving Langston alone with Maya. He sat beside her, pulling her into a gentle hug. "It's almost over, sweetheart. We'll go home soon." Maya rested her head against his chest, her small voice muffled. "I just want to be with you, Daddy." Langston's heart swelled with pride and love. "And that's exactly where you'll be, Maya. Always." In the days that followed, Langston's resolve only strengthened. As news of the incident spread, it became a rallying point for change, not just within Horizon Air, but across the entire airline industry. Training programs were restructured, oversight increased, and a new passenger Bill of Rights was introduced, ensuring dignity and respect for all travelers. For Langston, the fight wasn't over, but he was ready. He had made a promise to Maya, and he intended to keep it, not just for her, but for every passenger who trusted his airline with their safety and comfort. The path to justice. The private lounge at the Dallas airport was quiet, an oasis of calm amid the bustle of the terminal. Langston Reed sat beside Maya, who was curled up on a plush chair, her small hands clutching her stuffed giraffe. Though she had stopped crying, her eyes betrayed lingering fear and confusion. Langston's heart broke for his daughter, but he knew there was no time for self-recrimination. There was work to be done, justice to be sought, not just for Maya, but for anyone who might have been subjected to similar mistreatment. As Maya dozed, exhaustion finally overtaking her, Langston's assistant arrived with a tablet and a stack of documents. He greeted Langston with a firm handshake and an expression that mingled sympathy and determination. "Mr. Reed, we've started compiling evidence. The legal team is ready to proceed as soon as you give the word," the assistant said quietly, glancing at the sleeping Maya. Langston nodded, keeping his voice low. "Good. What do we have so far?" The assistant tapped on the tablet, bringing up a series of documents and reports. "We've interviewed several passengers who witnessed the flight attendant's behavior. Their statements corroborate Maya's account. Additionally, the HR department sent over Kelly's employment file. There are several prior complaints of unprofessional behavior, including one incident involving another child. All were dismissed without formal action." Langston's expression darkened. "That stops now. Compile a full timeline of her actions and the company's responses, or lack thereof. This isn't just about Kelly. It's about the systemic failures that allowed her to continue in her position." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied. "The PR team is also drafting a statement for the media. They recommend addressing the situation directly to maintain public trust." Langston glanced at Maya, his resolve hardening. "We'll release a statement, but it will focus on accountability and change. This isn't about damage control. It's about making things right." Later that afternoon, Langston met with the airline's leadership team in a conference room overlooking the tarmac. The room was filled with somber faces, each executive aware of the gravity of the situation. Langston stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding yet composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langston began, his voice steady, "today, my daughter experienced something no passenger should ever face: neglect, abuse, and humiliation at the hands of someone entrusted with her care. As CEO, I take full responsibility for what happened. It's clear that our current policies and oversight measures have failed." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Langston continued, "This incident isn't an isolated case. Kelly's file reveals a pattern of behavior that should have disqualified her from working in this industry. The fact that she remained employed despite multiple complaints is unacceptable." Langston paused, letting his words sink in. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a series of changes. First, I am ordering a complete audit of all employee records to identify any similar patterns of misconduct. Second, we will revise our training programs to emphasize not just customer service, but empathy, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution." He paced the room, his tone growing more resolute. "Third, we are establishing a dedicated passenger advocacy team to handle complaints and ensure swift, impartial investigations. No issue will go unaddressed. And finally, I am instituting a zero-tolerance policy for abusive behavior. Any employee found to have engaged in misconduct will be terminated immediately." One of the executives, a seasoned HR director, raised her hand. "Mr. Reed, these are significant changes. They'll require time and resources to implement." Langston met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "Then we'll dedicate the time and resources necessary. This isn't negotiable. If we fail to act now, we risk more than just our reputation. We risk losing the trust of our passengers and the integrity of our company." The room fell silent, and then the HR director nodded. "Understood. We'll get started immediately." As the meeting concluded, Langston returned to the lounge to find Maya awake, her wide eyes fixed on the window. She turned to him with a small smile as he approached. "Daddy, are we going home now?" she asked. "Soon, sweet pea," Langston said, sitting beside her. "But first, I want to tell you something important." Maya tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" Langston took her small hands in his. "What happened today wasn't your fault, Maya. You did everything right. You were polite and brave, even when someone else was mean and unfair. I'm so proud of you." Maya's lips quivered, and she leaned into her father's chest. "I was scared, Daddy." "I know, sweetheart," Langston said, stroking her hair. "But you don't have to be scared anymore. I'm going to make sure that woman can't hurt anyone else." Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust. "Promise." "I promise," Langston said firmly. "And you know Daddy always keeps his promises." That evening, Langston held a press conference to address the incident. Standing before a sea of reporters and flashing cameras, he spoke with the calm authority of a leader and the raw emotion of a father. "Earlier today, my daughter experienced mistreatment on a Horizon Air flight. This incident has brought to light serious shortcomings in our policies and practices, shortcomings that we will address immediately." Langston paused, his voice steady. "Let me be clear. Horizon Air has a zero-tolerance policy for abusive behavior. The flight attendant involved has been suspended pending a full investigation, and we are cooperating with law enforcement to ensure justice is served." He glanced at the cameras, his tone softening. "As a father, I'm heartbroken by what my daughter endured. But as a leader, I'm determined to use this experience to drive change, not just within Horizon Air, but across the industry. Every passenger deserves to feel safe, respected, and valued." The conference ended with a standing ovation from supporters who recognized the sincerity of Langston's commitment. As he left the stage, Langston felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about justice for Maya. It was about creating a legacy of integrity and compassion. Back at home, Langston tucked Maya into bed, her favorite bedtime story in hand. As he read to her, her eyes grew heavy, and she eventually drifted off to sleep. Langston sat beside her for a long time, his hand resting gently on her small shoulder. "You're safe now, sweet pea," he whispered, "and I'll make sure it stays that way." Langston knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. His daughter's strength had inspired him, and her ordeal had sparked a movement for change. And for Langston Reed, there was no greater motivation than the love of a father determined to protect his child. A legacy of change. The weeks following the incident aboard Horizon Air were a whirlwind of meetings, press conferences, and reform efforts. Langston Reed poured every ounce of his energy into ensuring that the mistreatment Maya endured would never happen again. Not to his daughter, not to anyone. The world was watching, and Langston knew this was his moment to set a standard not only for Horizon Air, but for the entire aviation industry. A father's mission. Sitting in his office overlooking the city skyline, Langston studied the mountain of reports his team had compiled. On one screen, a detailed timeline of complaints against Kelly revealed a disturbing pattern of abusive behavior stretching back years. On another, a draft of the airline's newly proposed passenger Bill of Rights was nearly complete. Langston's assistant entered the room, tablet in hand. "Mr. Reed, we've completed the audit of employee records. You were right. There are several cases similar to Kelly's where complaints were dismissed without proper investigation." Langston clenched his jaw. "This ends now. Every one of those cases needs to be revisited. If anyone was wrongfully terminated, we make it right. If there are other employees unfit for their roles, they're gone." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied, making a note. "And the training program overhaul?" Langston asked, leaning back in his chair. "It's ready to launch," the assistant said. "The new curriculum includes mandatory training in empathy, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution, as well as a robust whistleblower policy to protect employees and passengers who report misconduct." Langston nodded, his mind already moving to the next step. "Good. Schedule a meeting with the FAA. I want them to adopt these standards industry-wide." The assistant hesitated. "That might take time, sir." Langston's gaze sharpened. "Then we'll push harder. If Horizon Air can implement these changes, so can everyone else. Justice for Maya." While Langston worked tirelessly, the legal case against Kelly proceeded swiftly. Maya's testimony, though difficult for her to recount, was crucial in ensuring Kelly faced full accountability for her actions. Langston and Maya sat side by side in the courtroom, her small hand gripping his as she bravely answered questions about what had happened that day. Kelly's defense team attempted to downplay the incident, portraying her as overworked and stressed, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Passenger testimonies, security footage, and a detailed history of complaints painted a clear picture of an individual who had abused her position repeatedly. The verdict came swiftly. Kelly was found guilty of assaulting a minor and endangering the welfare of a child. She was sentenced to community service, mandatory sensitivity training, and probation. For Langston, the sentence was less about punishment and more about ensuring Kelly could never harm anyone else again. After the trial, Langston knelt beside Maya outside the courthouse, reporters and cameras swirling around them. "It's over now, sweet pea," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maya nodded, her voice small but firm. "You kept your promise, Daddy." Langston smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I always will." The Passenger Bill of Rights. Months later, Langston stood on a stage at the annual International Aviation Conference. The event was packed with industry leaders, journalists, and stakeholders eager to hear his keynote speech. In the audience sat Maya, her wide eyes fixed on her father as he prepared to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langston began, his voice resonating through the hall, "we are at a crossroads. The incident involving my daughter was not just a personal tragedy. It was a wake-up call for all of us. It exposed flaws in our systems, gaps in our policies, and a culture that too often prioritizes efficiency over humanity." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Today, I am proud to unveil Horizon Air's Passenger Bill of Rights. This document ensures that every passenger, regardless of age, race, or status, is treated with dignity, respect, and care. It includes strict guidelines for employee conduct, robust complaint resolution procedures, and zero tolerance for abuse." Langston held up the document, the cover bearing the Horizon Air logo, and the words Passenger Bill of Rights in bold letters. "But this isn't just for Horizon Air. I challenge every airline represented here today to adopt these standards. Let's set a global benchmark for how we treat the people who trust us with their journeys." The audience erupted into applause, and Langston's gaze shifted to Maya, who beamed at him from the front row. Her strength and resilience had inspired this change, and now it was being celebrated on a global stage. A new era. Back home, Langston and Maya settled into a sense of normalcy. Maya returned to school, her bright spirit fully restored. She often spoke of the changes her father was making and how proud she was to be part of something so important. One evening, as they sat together on the living room couch, Maya looked up at her father. "Daddy, do you think other kids will feel safe now because of what you did?" Langston wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I do, sweet pea, and that's all thanks to you. You were brave enough to speak up, even when it was hard." Maya smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we did this together." Langston kissed her forehead. "Me too, Maya. Me too." A lasting legacy. Over the next year, Horizon Air became a model for the industry. Other airlines followed Langston's lead, adopting similar policies and training programs. Reports of passenger mistreatment declined significantly, and passengers across the globe expressed gratitude for the changes. Langston knew the work was never truly done, but he also knew they had taken an important step forward. Every time he saw Maya's smiling face, he was reminded of why he had fought so hard and why he would continue to do so. For Langston Reed, justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about creating a world where his daughter, and everyone else, could soar to new heights without fear. A father's resolve. The following morning, Langston sat on the balcony of his home, the sun casting a golden glow over the city skyline. Maya was in the backyard playing with her friends, her laughter drifting up to him like a melody. For the first time in weeks, Langston allowed himself a moment of peace. He had fought tirelessly to ensure Maya's safety and justice, but the weight of the battle had taken its toll. His assistant arrived with a final report detailing the progress of the reforms. Langston scanned the document, his expression softening as he read about the changes that were already making an impact. Complaints were being addressed swiftly, employees were undergoing rigorous training, and passengers were sharing stories of feeling valued and respected. "Mr. Reed," his assistant said, breaking his thoughts, "the industry council has scheduled a follow-up meeting. They've invited you to discuss implementing your policies on a broader scale." Langston nodded, his resolve returning. "I'll be there. We've made progress, but this is just the beginning." Maya's courage. Later that evening, Langston sat with Maya at the dinner table. Her face was bright, her energy restored after a day of play. As they ate, Maya looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Daddy, do you think people will remember what happened to me?" she asked, her voice curious rather than sad. Langston set down his fork, meeting her gaze. "Yes, sweetheart. People will remember. Not because it was bad, but because it showed them how important it is to do the right thing. You helped change the world, Maya." Maya's eyes widened. "Me?" Langston smiled. "Yes, you. It was your bravery that made everything happen. You spoke up, even when it was scary. That's what heroes do." Maya blushed, a shy smile spreading across her face. "Maybe I can be a hero like you someday." Langston reached across the table, taking her hand. "You already are, Maya. A global impact." In the months that followed, Langston's policies became a model for airlines worldwide. The FAA adopted Horizon Air's Passenger Bill of Rights, mandating its implementation across all U.S.-based airlines. International carriers soon followed suit, recognizing the importance of treating passengers with dignity and care. Langston became a sought-after speaker at industry events, sharing his vision for a more compassionate aviation industry. But through it all, he remained grounded, dedicating his time to Maya and ensuring she never felt overshadowed by the attention their story had garnered. One evening, as they watched a documentary about aviation reforms on TV, Maya turned to Langston with a proud smile. "Daddy, they're talking about you." Langston chuckled, pulling her close. "They're talking about us, sweet pea. This was our journey." A final promise. Years later, as Maya prepared to board a flight for her first solo trip to visit her grandmother, Langston walked her to the gate. Now a confident teenager, Maya looked back at her father, her eyes filled with excitement and a hint of nervousness. "Are you sure you'll be okay without me?" Langston teased, his tone light. Maya giggled. "I'll be fine, Daddy. You made sure of that." Langston knelt, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Remember, if anything ever feels wrong, you speak up. Always." "I promise," Maya said, her voice steady. "And I'll text you as soon as I land." Langston hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. "I love you, Maya. Always." "Love you too, Daddy," she replied, before disappearing through the boarding gate. As Langston watched the plane take off, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had fought for justice, built a legacy of change, and ensured a safer world for his daughter and countless others. Maya's laughter, her strength, and her resilience were proof that even in the face of adversity, love and determination could triumph. And as the plane soared into the sky, Langston Reed smiled, knowing his promise to protect her and to make the world a better place had been fulfilled.